everybody, it's your boy Gsluke here with our course breakdown for the 3M Open, going to get you prepped for everything you need to know for this week's event, whether it's my key stats for analysis, our comp courses, or of course the highly anticipated hole-by-hole breakdown. We talk through all the strategy that players will be facing. A quick look back at last week though, because Cam Smith pulled it off, right? Mullet Man was able to take home the win there for the Open, take home that claret jug, and of course kind of stole it from Rory's grasp. So kind of gutted for Rory McIlroy. You could tell how disappointed he was after his round, but there's no denying that Cam Smith went out there and won that damn thing. And of course, our Discord chat was an absolute Cam Smith fan club, a ton of outright tickets, including myself. Also, a lot of dollars won on DFS and prize picks because of the Mullet Man. So overall, was a great Sunday for most of the community, and really looking forward to this week to try to carry some of that momentum, right? A little bit of extra units in the bankroll this week with a little bit less attention and perhaps a little bit of fatigue after the major championships. You usually get a larger edge on these type of golf tournaments. It's a little bit of a weaker field, not quite as many headliner names. So those that are able to do their due diligence, go into the stats, particularly what we saw for the last two alternate field events, you're going to be at a huge advantage to the field. So that's what we'll focus on here, trying to bring you that edge here for the 3M Open. So excited to hop into it. Let's go ahead and start off with a quick review of the golf course, just to make sure we're all on the same page. TPC Twin Cities, we got ourselves an Arnold Palmer design up there in Blaine, Minnesota. It is a par 71 that is 7,431 yards long. So we're looking at, on paper, a relatively long par 71, but when we consider that this is at elevation, also the fact that you've got relatively large landing areas, players will have driver in hand more often than not, and as a result, you've seen the score go super low here. The first winner was at 21 under par, then you got 19 under par with Michael Thompson. Last year, it's still trending downwards. You had Cam Champ at minus 15, but I'd expect this to be a birdie fest once again. You're dealing with, like I said, large landing areas, relatively large greens, and greens without much undulation that are running at 12 on the stint meter should be absolutely pristine this time of year. So you're going to see plenty of fireworks up there in Blaine. So let's talk through some of the specifics. First off, the scoring average last year was 0.56 strokes under par, so a little bit better than tour average. So it wasn't quite the birdie fest like we saw there in 2019 or 2020, but still a lot easier than what we're used to seeing, though the penalty strokes per round were elite. They were 0.78 strokes per round, which is almost 0.4 of a stroke more per round than what you're used to seeing. And all of that is due to the water hazards, where you have water in play on 15 of 18 holes. So that's something we'll talk extensively about during the strategy section when we're going hole by hole, but that's really the key characteristic of this golf course. The greens, like I said, right about tour average, maybe slightly larger than tour average on a few cases, but they're playing to right around 6,500 square foot per green. The GIR percentage was much higher though, so despite them not being elite in terms of their size, they were elite in terms of GIR. They were hit at a 72.6% rate, which was almost a whole 5% higher than tour average, which doesn't seem like all that much, but when you're talking from a 150 player sample size, every single percent adds up. Next up, we've got the green speeds, which are going to be 12, so running relatively fast, what players are used to, not the 11 that we saw for the Open, and they are bent grass greens. The fairways are also slightly larger than average. So like I said, this is a very typical golf course, 35.6 yards wide on average, and the fairway percentage was higher as a result, right? 68.2% in terms of fairways hit. So about 2.3% higher than tour average. So you're looking at a golf course that isn't all that difficult from tee to green, but to go out there and get to 20, maybe 15 under par like you saw for Cameron Champ, you are certainly going to have to set up birdie opportunities because of all those penalty strokes. Again, the average for the field is nearly a stroke per round, and over 4 rounds, right? That's what, 3 or 4 water balls for a majority of the field, let alone the guys that are playing a little bit sideways, maybe don't have their best stuff, could very easily just eject from this golf tournament. So kind of like the Florida swing, we're going to see a lot of volatility in scores and also just in results. Even with some of the top end players, you're going to get that same type of effect this week. Whoever goes out there and is able to execute shots the best, keep themselves out of trouble, perhaps play a little bit more strategically, is going to find their hand raised at the end like you would in a fight. Obviously, get their hand on the hardware there. The rough is also a penalty. So it's not just the water off the tee, all of those water hazards that come into play. You're dealing with 4-inch Kentucky bluegrass rough and also patches of fescue that are almost, I'd say hip high. I mean, last year with Cameron Champ, you'll remember on hole 18, he got into some of that fescue. So it's out there. It's not all that prevalent, but even just the primary rough, that's a 4-inch Kentucky bluegrass, you do not want to mess with, particularly if you have a forced carryover water like what you might have there on 18. So in general, you're looking at I would say positional golf course. I mean, though it's 7,400 yards, it's at elevation, so probably playing closer to 71, maybe even 7,000 yards. And with all the water in play, the fact that you have relatively large greens without much undulation, it's target practice, right? Go after pins. Try and make 25 to 30 birdies on the week. And even if you end up making a few double bogeys, you might find yourself in contention. So it won't be a surprise when we get to the key stats section that we're looking at a lot of the high-end volatile birdie makers, right? Guys that are going to go out there and put themselves in position. Now, with all the water in play, that definitely makes it a scary prospect because those sort of aggressive players will also be taking on pins and perhaps bringing on a lot more risk with the water. But again, those are the type of guys that can actually win this golf tournament. I mean, Cameron Champ fits that build perfectly, right? An extremely aggressive player. So don't be surprised when we get to that section to see those type of players getting to the top. Next up, let's go ahead and go through this golf course and give you just an idea of exactly what these players are facing. Alrighty, we've got the Pro Visualizer tool locked and loaded, ready to go. And with hole number 1, you'll get an idea of exactly what to expect, which, like I said, water's quote unquote in play on 15 of 18 holes. And though it's in play here on hole number 1, you'd have to shank it off the tee to end up in it. So some of the whole water narrative might be a little bit overplayed this week, but it's certainly not a hole you can sleep on because you're going to be teeing off from the tournament tees, having to have a forced carry over a few bunkers, or if you end up just necking it a little bit, or perhaps getting a little bit too spinny on your first tee shot, you're going to have a hard approach shot here. But, execute that first off the tee shot there early in the morning, late in the afternoon, whatever it may be, and you're going to have a very simple birdie look, right? 130 yards into a relatively large surface. And like I mentioned earlier, they're all flat. I mean, you're looking at a true resort style golf course where if you're going to be 10 to 15 feet, I mean, you might have a similar make percentage from that range from what you saw from like 5 to 7 feet around St. Andrews. So you're going to look at a lot of scoring, particularly on that first hole. Hole number 2 is where you see water actually come into play, right? Obviously, the water the whole way up the right, and for also on your approach shot, you're going to have water in play on the front side. So this is not an easy hole, but it's still a generous landing area, right around 30, 35 yards wide here. For most players will be aiming. And if you can hit the fairway, right? So obviously a huge priority on accuracy over the first 2 holes, you're going to have a wedge, maybe a 9-iron at the very most in. So another birdie opportunity if you're on with your driver. Now, one thing to note about hole number 3, it's listed as a par 5 on Pro Visualizer, but they will be playing it as a par 4. So they will be teeing off from up here, making it right around 480 yards. That's what the PGA Tour has it listed at, which means that they're going to be hitting their first tee shots well past these bunkers. So the hole is going to play a lot differently. I mean, this is only 290 yards right here. I mean, you could see players getting it out there to this whole 40-yard wide part of the fairway. So it's generous enough. There's no fairway bunkers to worry about. I guess it does kind of bring the water into play, but I mean, you'd have to miss by 30 yards left to do so. But if you can hit this fairway, you're going to have like 130, 140 yards in. Really nothing to worry about. We'll set target number 2 there on the flagstick, and you can see 140-yard shot. So this is a simple hole that maybe on paper, a converted par 5 to a par 4 looks like it's going to play difficult. Because of the tee location being moved up an entire tee box, it really simplifies things for these players. Hole number 4 is 180 yards. It also has water in play down the left side. The water in front really isn't a factor, but this is an easy hole, right? You're going to have like I'd say 7-6 iron at the very most for some of the shorter players on tour. And though it is exposed, you're dealing with, I guess, the most significant winds here. At TPC Twin Cities, wind isn't usually a massive factor. It was through the first 2 rounds last year in 2021, but in 2019 and 2020, it wasn't there at all. It was like playing in a dome for almost the whole week, and that's why we saw 20 under par, 21 under par end up taking it down. So it's a relatively simple hole as long as the wind isn't there. Hole 5 is 411 yards. Now, pretty much everyone's going to hit an iron off the tee. Maybe you see a few hybrids from some of the shorter players, but you have this cross bunker up here. You can't really push it past it because it is right around 300 yards to get to it. So most players will just lay up, hit a wedge into this green, and again, another birdie op. Hole 6 is the first true par 5, so it's nearly 600 yards, but depending on how aggressive you take off the tee in terms of a line, you could have a mid-iron in, right? So some of the longer players like a Cameron Champ are going to push it out here towards this cart path, which you can see it's just 310 yards. At elevation, guys like Cam Champ, bombers like Keith Mitchell last year, Johnny Vegas, who played extremely well, we're getting well past this, right out there to like 355 with the elevation change, leaving about 200. Actually, let's give you the direct line here. Let's put it right on the flag stick. About 200 yards shot into the green, which, like I said, it's going to play like 180 yards because of elevation. You could see people hitting 7-iron or 8-iron into this par 5. So it is a very solid eagle look, if not a birdie look, for the entire field. Hole 7, you've got water in play the entire way down the left. It is relatively short though, so perhaps you see a few people hit driver and just try to get it up into the bunker. The issue though is if you end up in this part of the bunker, you got yourself that 40-50 yard bunker shot, which tour players absolutely hate to have. It's absolute nightmare fuel for everybody out there. But if you play it smart, just get it out there in the fairway with the driving iron, perhaps even a 3-wood, something like that. You're going to have a flip wedge onto the green. Hole 8 is 205 yards, so relatively long. It's not quite as simple as the first par 3 we saw. And you also have water over the back, so you don't want to overshoot this. Most players are going to play it conservatively. Just try to get it on the surface and 2-putt. There are other holes where you can make your hay. Right, there's other holes where you can go out there, play aggressively, particularly over the first 7 holes. Hole 8 isn't a place to push your luck. Hole 9 is the hardest hole on the golf course. It's 500 yards. It's a par 4. You don't really have water in play for the tee shot. Some of the bombers might be able to get it out there towards the road there and leave a wedge in, but this is really just hit a fairway, set it over there to the left, set up a good angle into the green. Ideally, if you can push it down here a little bit further and on the left, you can have a line that isn't over the water. Obviously for a Sunday pin location where they're going to put it in the back right over there, that's not going to be the case, right? But if they're playing it to one of the back left locations or just the front pin location, like you'll see there for Thursday or Friday, should be a birdie hole, at least if you can hit the fairway. If you don't, and you're in that Kentucky bluegrass rough, you might have a hard time making bogey at that rate. Hole 10, so you go across the property to the other side. Hole 10 has water down the whole entire thing. This hole is just a nightmare to start on because first off, you miss down the left, you have the bunkers in play, you have a little bit of trees in play too, so if you're extremely offline, you hit a duck hook or something like that, you're really going to have a hard time making bogey. And on the right side, you have this bog. All these trees up there behind the green, you have another set of a lake to worry about, which it doesn't seem like this is a lake here. It is. This is a natural area. If you hit into it, you're probably not hitting out of it. This is a tricky hole to start on. So, if I'm playing Showdown for Thursday or Friday, it's not going to be a huge edge, but I'd ideally want guys starting on 1. Hole number 10, could be a little bit of a demotivating factor if you go out there and make a double bogey on hole number 1. Hole number 11 is 470, so another difficult hole. So the back 9, definitely a much harder start than the front. 470, the fairway bunker is certainly in play, and though it's a extremely large green, super big target, you want to make sure you're hitting out of that short grass, or else it can be a relatively tough shot. You have another par 5. You have 2 of them on the back 9. So despite having the hard start there with holes 10 and 11, you are at least going to get 2 par 5s on the docket. This one especially reachable if you can hit the fairway. So you can see I have it set at just 300 yards. The more aggressive players might try to push it down there a little bit more, but obviously kind of brings the lake into play if you do so. But pushing it down there sets up a really short shot. Sets up right around 230 yards into a green. So it's going to be eagled by some of the field, but a birdie opportunity for everybody nonetheless. Next up, we've got hole 13, which is 216 yards, which a recurring theme here is going to be long par 3s. Another hole where you're just trying to get it on the surface, 2-putt and get out of there. The bunker is relatively deep here. It's one of the deepest bunkers on the golf course. And though it doesn't have a lot of undulation, you don't want to take your chances on these holes. There's a lot better opportunities to be had, such as hole 14, 416 yards. As long as you get it in the short stuff here, you're looking at a very gettable hole. So most players are going to hit iron off the tee, play it to this extremely wide part, and set up probably an 8 or a 9 iron in. So another hole where you're looking to make birdie. On Sunday, they will tuck it to the back left, which will make it difficult. Or even the front left pin location, which they might use on like Thursday or Friday, might be a little bit tough. But outside of that, right, back right, you're looking at a ton of birdies. Front right even, near this bunker, probably still looking at a ton of birdies because players are going to have a short iron in hand at the very most. If not players being aggressive, right? You might see some guys try to push it down there. Like, just try and take the water out of play, hit it over the water pretty much, and play it into the rough over here. I mean, more than likely, you're going to see some guys that end up way over here, like 340, 350 yards. They're just hitting chip shots into the green, particularly if they get a solid wind that's downwind. Then you might see this play a little bit more often. Or even with a 3-wood, I mean, realistically, you're going to probably see some guys that just bash it into this stuff over here, where it's like 300 yards off the tee. You could probably hit a 3-wood downwind that long. It's not nearly as difficult a hole as you think. Like, if you're playing strategically around the 3M Open, the water isn't nearly as much in play as you'd expect. Hole 15 is 451 yards. It's not easy, but it's also not difficult. It's about as average a hole as you're going to get around TPC Twin Cities. Relatively small green, though. So compared to some of the other ones, it's not quite as large, but yeah, not a very long hole either. Just your average run-of-the-mill hole around this type of track. Hole 16 is 407 yards, so in the opposite direction, right around the same length, maybe a little bit shorter. You got the water down the right, though, so just most players will probably hit iron off the tee, probably not even hit it 290. They'll probably hit it something like 260, 270 here, and still have a wedge at the very most end. So this is a positional hole. Now, if you want to be crazy about it, right, be somebody like Cameron Champ or something and try to push it down here. I mean, what is it to this flat here? 350? You might see players that lay up just in front of this bunker, have a little flip wedge in, but only the longest elite tier power players on tour will be thinking about that sort of thing. And lastly, the last par 3 here, hole 17, it's a tough one. It got a hole carry over water 200 yards. My home golf course I play all the time also has a similar hole 17. It's not a fun thing to deal with. You're going to see a lot of players bail out into the bunker. And when you have the Sunday pin location back here in the back left, even the Thursday or Friday pin location, where it's here in the front right, is going to be extremely tricky. And lastly, the last hole they're dealing with, hole 18, the most famous hole around here, is that kind of like the hole at API, where it's the par 5 around a lake, a little bit less severe this time around. And you can see they added a tee box back here to accommodate the pros, to make it really a decision for your second shot, because even if you get it out there 300 yards, guys, I mean, let me just show you what you're dealing with here. What is it, like 250 at 230 yards, right? But over the water. That means any sort of a neck or a mishit, you're going to end up over here. There's rocks in front of it. You're going to see players that hit it off the rocks, end up coming backwards. You're going to see players that end up hitting the rocks and bouncing onto the green to like 4 to 5 feet. This is a really fun hole, but unless you hit the fairway and you hit it out there a good ways, you're not even thinking about it. I mean, most players realistically are just going to lay up down over here, right around the corner, give themselves a straightforward wedge shot into the green and right around that 100-yard range. So it's an interesting hole. It's certainly one of the better risk-reward holes you're going to find on tour. But one of some of the elite players, right? If you're aggressive here and you push it down there, I mean, you realistically, let's see how short of a shot you can have. If you hit it 330, you can have 200 yards into this green. So if you go for it and you successfully pull it off at 18, I mean, you could have a realistic, truly realistic shot at going out there and making an eagle. So it'll be fun to watch, especially there on Saturday and Sunday when the golf tournament is on the line. All right, now that we've seen the golf course, let's talk about my key stats for analysis. So at number 1, shots gained approach, which I'm sure you're tired of hearing that as my number 1 key stat. That's always going to be the case, so we won't harp on it too much, other than maybe the long iron shots are a little bit slept on this week. We talked about a lot of wedges, particularly that 125 to 150 range is going to be a little bit overutilized around TPC Twin Cities, but also that 175 to 200 and that 200 to 225 yard range may be worth a few extra looks, because if you remember, right, a few of the longer par 4s, you'll have a few long irons in hand, but the par 3s, all 175 to 200 or 200 plus yards, that's going to be a key range, right? Trying to avoid landmines on the holes that really don't even have water in place. So that's something I'm considering with approach play, but more than anything, with a target style golf course, it's all about execution. You want iron players that are coming in hot. So particularly over their last, let's say 10 to 12 rounds, guys that are coming in gaining significantly to the field are going to get a huge bump for my modeling this week. Next up, we've got shots gained off the tee, and I'm not really favoring one way or the other. It's a true shots gained total overall. So driving accuracy, driving distance, both going to be equal parts of the equation, because with all the landmines in terms of water hazards off the tee, but also all of the, I'd say, upside you get with that distance was evident on the leaderboard. I mean, last year, right, winner, Cam Champ, the longest player on tour. You had Keith Mitchell up there, guys like Johnny Vegas that were some of the longer players on tour, and even going the whole way through the top 10 to top 20, a lot of guys that are well longer than tour average. So despite there being an emphasis on driving accuracy, having that lethal combination and being able to combine both was a great way to go out there and take apart the golf course. So shots gained off the tee, not nearly as important as shots gained approach, but definitely more important this week than most. And at number 3, a stat that I'm really using to differentiate the field is birdie or better percentage. With all those birdie looks that are out there, going out there and being aggressive, making 25 to 30 birdies is what it's going to take. You're going to have a lot of high numbers, and the guys that are more willing to go out there and go for it are going to get a boost in my modeling. So just pure birdie percentage, the players that go out there and do the most scoring are going to, of course, play better in fantasy formats, get a lot more points on Draftkings, all that sort of fun stuff, but also at this type of venue, have the upside to perhaps take home the 3M Open. A few other key stats I'm using in my modeling: shots gained putting on bent grass, so it's not really a putting golf course. You're going to hit plenty of greens, plenty of fairways, which sometimes, like the Travelers, can play into a putting skill set. But here, more importantly than anything, it's about making eagles, right? Taking apart of par 5s, that sort of thing. It's a little bit more of a ball striking heavy golf course, but shots gained putting on bent grass, certainly something that can help a player's case. Par 5 scoring, also important in my model. Comp course history, which we'll talk about our comps here in just a minute, are going to be important in my analysis. Shots gained around the green, not all that important, but it is at least on the list, right? Not going to completely ignore it here. Driving distance, I am giving a little boost to guys with distance just because of the leaderboard last year. Like I said, guys like Mitchell, Champ in Vegas absolutely killed it. Shots gained approach from 175 to 200. We mentioned that. That's in addition to the player pull down low. Also, shots gained approach from 200 plus yards and 3M Open history. So despite there's only being 3 years of history, the guys that have killed it here over the first 2 to 3 years, it isn't going to be a negative, to say the very least. And for our comp courses, at number 1, we have the Innisbrook Resort Copperhead course, home of the Valspar Championship. I've been there the last 2 years, have seen 8 rounds of professional golf, and it's a golf course where you got to hit your spots. It's a little bit longer off the tee. It's a little bit more off the tee heavy, perhaps, than what you get this week, but hitting those shots into greens, relatively large surfaces, greens that don't have all that much undulation, it tends to reward the guys that are better from tee to green than the guys that are better putters, right? And that's exactly what you've seen here. Just think of Keegan Bradley. He's been a key factor at that golf course over the last 2 years. And though Sam Burns is back-to-back champion, obviously a great putter, he's a majority done it with his ball striking in both instances. I believe this year gained less than 3 strokes to the field with the flat stick. There in 2020, I believe it was less than 4 or 5 strokes to the field, which for a winner, right? We're used to seeing guys sometimes gain 6, 7 strokes to the field. He did a majority off the tee and on approach. So it's a similar type of venue from that aspect, kind of has I would say similar type of par 3s, right? 175 to 200 is overutilized there. Also that 200 plus yard range. So in terms of some of the nuances, par 5 scoring, also extremely important around the Valspar Championship. Sam Burns absolutely killed it there in 2020 and 2021 en route to his victories. Is something that I'm looking at from a comp perspective. And it shouldn't be surprising too, right? It's a Florida golf course, which obviously from a foliage standpoint, from a visual standpoint, they aren't going to be great comparisons there, but from a skill set standpoint, with all that water in play, definitely something I'm looking at. Next up, we've got TPC River Highlands, so home of the Travelers Championship. We saw that just a few weeks ago. A golf course where it's easy to hit fairways, easy to hit greens. Same story we have this week, and we're putting. I thought it might separate the field that week. It was all about the aggressiveness, right? The guys at the top of that leaderboard were the players that were going to go out there and do their scoring. So, Sahith Theegala obviously in contention. You had Xander Schauffele who ended up winning there. I've kind of adjusted my modeling as a result, right? That's a little bit more about ball striking than I was giving him credit for. And obviously, we'll tinker our models from time to time. But when I was going through my analysis for this week, it was just checking all the same boxes, right? Hitting a bunch of fairways, hitting a bunch of greens. Everyone's going to be doing that. So it's about the guys that are going to be the most precise. They're going to go out there and go for it, make those 20 to 25 birdies that you also need around a Travelers Championship. Another course where it's highly volatile because of some of the water in play, some of the difficult holes, but you definitely have a bunch of easy holes mixed in where you're going to have wedges at the Travelers. So another golf course we've seen of late that we can use as a comp, and perhaps maybe even more useful because it's been over the last 20 to 24 rounds. And lastly, we have TPC Sawgrass, another Florida golf course. So similar to Copperhead, positional, right? You got to hit it to spots. It's going to be plenty of hazards to be had off the tee. The greens, they're a little bit more undulated around TPC Sawgrass. There's a lot huger penalty for missing greens there. So the winning scoring averages aren't necessarily in line, but I like the shots, at least the shot making off the tee. I think a lot of it's similar. And though the approach play is not nearly as difficult, we're here around TPC Twin Cities. I think it's a solid comp, right? The guys that have played well there, particularly, this is not as strong a field. So from a field strength perspective, that's the one real critique you could give between the events. But maybe the mid-tier, lower-tier guys that have popped at TPC Sawgrass from time to time are worth a few extra looks in your modeling. Anyways, that's all I've got for the course breakdown. Before you hop on out of here, go ahead and smash that like button. And also, let me know down in the comments what you think the winning score will be this week. I'm really looking forward to this event. We'll have our usual docket of fantasy content, also prize picks videos, showdown live streams throughout the weekend. So if you haven't already subscribed, make sure you do so you don't miss any of that when it drops. But best of luck with all of your slips, any fantasy lineups you're doing for this week. And as per usual, if you're looking for access to my Discord server, access to my projections, again, all the key stats we're talking about comp courses, I use in my modeling. So if you're looking for access to that or just more access to me in general, make sure to check out my Patreon page. I do have it linked down below. It is $10 for the month. It is the best way to get access to everything I have to offer. So with that being said, guys, like I said, thank you for all your support. Best of luck with everything you're going after this week, and let's take home some cash.